Hello, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of Dentistry Beyond the Numbers. I'm Dr. Marc Liechtung, and with me today is a rising star in who can really aid and move our practices forward. And that's a guy who started a company he'll get into it more than I will, about over 10 years ago. His name is Colin Carr from Carr Realty, which has really taken over the business by storm. So, Colin, welcome, and I'm really happy to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
I love it. A little word out there. I grew up in a real estate family that, not to the extent what Colin does, but really in the other levels of maybe real estate for the commercial and more like strip centers and things like that. And, I knew about certain things we're going to dive into, and I always thought that would be help in driving my EBITDA. And I think what Colin brings us today is some very valuable tools. And we're going to get into everything you need about real estate in your practice. And the exciting thing is I have a guy here who's a guru, 15 years experience. He's going to give us actionable things for negotiating, but more important, it's like a referral. A guy comes in with a massive infection, right, Colin, around the canine, shutting the eye. Who wants to touch it? Let someone else deal with it because it could be dangerous. And that's really the way I look at Carr Realty. So without further ado, just give me an idea of, what made you start your real estate career? What got you into real estate as opposed to some of us, guys who were forced to become a doctor by their mothers? You know what I mean? Like, what happened? I mean, I had to be a doctor, but but go ahead. Tell me what got you.
I'll give the Cliff Notes version. So, got out of high school, did not know what I wanted to study, so I did the proverbial. I'll take a semester off, figure it out, and then I'll start up. And in that first, couple months not going to school, I met a gentleman that owned over a dozen apartment complexes. And I offered to take him to lunch, and he was gracious enough to say yes. And then I asked him if I could drive around with him. Got another yes. And after a couple days of pestering him, I said, "Look, I'll work for free. I need to learn. I like this. I'm interested in real estate." And he was just a really great guy, and he took me underneath his wings, and he let me shadow him around for months, and then eventually, gave me my first apartment complex to manage. And so I did that for a while, back in Michigan, moved to Colorado in my early 20s, and I started, picking up more properties, and I had a number of mid-rise, high-rise properties, hundreds of tenants. And I did that for a few years, cut my teeth in that area. Is a great start. And then when I was 22, I got my broker's license, and I went to work for a guy that did Walmart's, Wendy's, Blockbuster, large national retail tenants. And I started with him, and then again, just short story long, I found myself doing a bunch of office and industrial deals. And then years into my brokerage career, one of my industrial clients bought a medical building, and he asked me to lease it. And so that was my entrance into the medical realm. And then what got me to connect the dots as far as, working for a large international firm and then starting Carr is I had a number of transactions that happened in a very short period of time where I was the landlord agent. These properties were owned by large institutional owners, REITs, these very sophisticated investment groups. And I had a number of deals that happened in a very short sequence where the doctors had no representation. They had no agent, no broker, no consultant, no one helping them. And and these doctors overpaid like $400, $500, $600,000 on their leases, on new leases, on lease renewals. And these guys were not only overpaying, but how much they were missing out on hundreds of thousands of dollars in concessions and free rent and building allowance. And so I had a couple of these deals that happened in a short period of time, and it just didn't feel right. I was looking at these doctors, and they were so sincere. They were truly trying to make an impact in the community. They had thousands of patients. They had, a dozen staff. And yet here comes this one transaction that they've never had any training on whatsoever. They didn't have the time, the energy to find someone, didn't know you could hire someone. And after watching a couple of these guys just get completely annihilated, I decided to focus exclusively on healthcare, only working on a tenant buyer side for the doctor. And I launched that company. Actually, we're coming up on 16 years.
Awesome.
So
Congratulations. That's great. So let me ask you something before we get into the growth of Carr. It's a big leap going from the behemoth landlords with all the money to guys like us that are looking either to start up or get a larger space. So you really went into the consumer end. How was that for you at the beginning? You're now helping people, guiding us towards better leases, certain clauses we wouldn't even know what to ask for, free rent that we wouldn't even know was existing. How'd that go for you the sudden onset when you made that change?
It was really good. I got a push out of the nest, so to speak. One of the landlords, it's now the largest healthcare REIT in the world. At the time, it was a smaller version that's been acquired since then. But I was talking about one of these deals, and he was telling me what lease rate to go at the doctor with, no concessions, all sorts of other hidden things in the deal. I mean, he was pushing hidden fees through. And I asked him, I said, isn't that a little predatory, or isn't it just a little egregious? Like, I get the idea you want to make really good money, but I'm like, this is nearly predatory or it is predatory, but it's nearly unbelievable, like how aggressive we're going at this guy. He doesn't know what he's doing. And the asset manager said, Colin, he goes, get it done for me or I'll find someone else who will. And he hangs the phone up on me. And then I meet with the doctor and I'm putting this deal in front of him and he looks right at me and he goes, Colin, he goes, I don't know what I'm doing. And he goes, can you please tell me this is a good or a bad deal? And so I saw the just complete opposite spectrums as far as somebody who is a seasoned pro, who's an assassin, who knows how to take care of business. And then this gentleman was looking at me in so much sincerity. And I looked at him and I said, I can't answer that question. I have a legal obligation to the landlord. And so after a couple of those like really, really straightforward interactions, I just knew I'd rather be on this side of the transaction. I was confident in my ability to help people. And then I started doing a few of those deals. And I showed the doctors on the tenant side what I saved them going up against professional landlords. And it was meaningful. Like, you save a doctor $400,000. They're not wondering if they've got an advocate or a friend in you. And so I just liked the way it felt better. And I said, look, if the money was the same, it was even, I'd rather be on this side. And it turns out that, we've been able to make a go of it.
It's awesome. For going on 16 years, that's more than making a go of it. That's great.
Yeah.
So I want to just tell the listeners, by the end of this episode, now that we validated somebody like Colin Carr to guide us through this forest of real estate that can really strap us, and I'll talk about that, my personal experience about what I found, but also what to ask for when you're starting out, maybe making a change for the better or the worse. I meet a lot of doctors got what I call an ego lease. These doctors that want 2,500 square feet, they need 1,200. They want to be on Fifth Avenue, Rodeo Drive, Michigan Avenue. They want to be on the big, but they don't need that. And my question to you is, do you find a lot of that? Do you have to really reel them in a little bit and say, Doc, this is going to be $22,000 a month. The other one's going to be 11.5, and you're not even near 22 to be able to afford it. So do you have a lot of those come to Jesus moments with your clients?
Yeah, we do because, it's like anything. If you go shopping for a car or for a house, it's just natural instinct. You want the nicest that's available. What we try to do, or what we actually do in every transaction, what we try to communicate is we're always looking at multiple properties. So one of the fundamentals and this is our philosophies as far as how we help clients, whether it's a startup or a relocation or whether someone's scaling, we want to look at options to lease and options to purchase. And we want to show them, retail versus office. We want to give them a spread of options to consider, because if you pick 4 or 5 properties, if it's available, there's some markets like where you say, hey, I got to be on this block in New York, and you might only have 2 properties. But a lot of markets, you can get 4 or 5 or 6 viable options. Even if 1 or 2 is the favorite, it helps to educate you. And then we negotiate on 4 or 5 properties simultaneously. And this is a really different philosophy in commercial real estate than residential. Residential, you find a house you like, you submit an offer in a contract form. The landlord or the seller says yes, they sign it, you're under contract. Commercial real estate, you trade paper back and forth sometimes 3, 4, 5 times. And it's market and common to negotiate with multiple landlords or sellers simultaneously. And the beauty of that is you can then show them, listen, this Michigan Avenue property is $22,000. This one's right around the corner at $11,000. How much more could you do with $11,000 of marketing? Or are you really going to pick up not just $11,000 of business because you bill $1, you don't keep $1. You increase your overhead by $11,000 a month. You might need to increase your revenue by $50,000 a month to have $11,000 left over to pay for it. And so we try to paint that picture and say, listen, at the end of the day, doctor, you're in control. You're the one who's going to say yes or no and sign the lease. But when you put it in perspective and you show them the pros and cons of each property, is this signage really worth it? Or would you rather have a nicer window line or nicer co-tenants? What are the pros and cons? It helps them to come to that right decision typically. And then sometimes you do get the person that says, I want the Bugatti. Okay. I know the Lexus would be really nice, but
That's
I,
it.
I'm willing to pay for the Bugatti or the Rolls Royce.
I mean, some people feel they can't do Bentley dentistry from a Chevy location. I do want to ask you, before we dive into some of these examples and things we both come across, what do you feel about internet today? The marketing is all done by internet. It's not really done by handing out papers and location. Do you think we as medical and healthcare professionals can start thinking about second and third floors more so rather than being straight up on a retail level because we get our new patients from the internet? It's not as much in your face. Or do you still see the healthcare world going to the main street level?
I would say both the things you said are true. We're seeing more healthcare companies go into retail spaces, more healthcare franchises, not just in dentistry, in everything. Whether it's IV therapy or med spas or all these other like dry sauna concepts. Like you're seeing healthcare franchises explode right now, and they all want retail exposure. I'm a big fan of office. I'm a big fan of the beauty of a lower lease rate is you can pump that money into marketing, like you said. And then if you find yourself in a place where you're booking out, new patients 4 or 5 months, you can ratchet that down. You cannot ratchet down your rent. If you commit to the corner of Main and Main and you commit to that extremely high rent payment and you find yourself it's not benefiting you, you're not getting the patients you want off it, or you don't need them, there's nothing you can do about it. You are locked into that, for the duration of the lease. So I'm a big fan of at least looking at it. Now, if I looked at an office space and it was going to be, 20,000 or let's bring it down for our non-New York listeners. Let's say you look at an office space and it's 8,000, the retail's 9,000. Well, sure, like $1,000 for an extra for a huge sign and for other aspects of visibility and ease of just walking in. But a lot of times you're looking at it's 10,000 for the retail space and it's 6,000 for the office. And you just start saying, look, I'd rather put that money into targeted marketing or in a higher level of technology or better equipment or better staff. And if you're good at what you do, the number one way you're going to grow your practice is going to be internal referrals.
I know, and that's major. So I want to tell you this. I know personally, if I was listening to this show right now, I'd be really interested because there is so many aspects in my life right now through the groups, through practices that we're having real estate issues. And they come hard and they come fast and it's relentless because the landlord is out to better the building. They don't care you got a $3 million practice or a $600,000 practice and it's growing. They want their building sold, rent changed, renovation, the bank, this or that. But my question to you is, and I want to get this off the table because I think people would think that you're a very costly partner. And the one thing I learned about Carr Realty is back a number of years ago, I was looking for a space in New York and I met a gentleman who works for Carr. His name is Evan Gassman. The first thing he came in and we talked about him, but he was really knowledgeable, very helpful. And I said, okay, how do we get this done? And he goes, well, you don't pay us. So I want my listeners to understand whatever Colin's saying today. And when you reach out to Carr Realty, and we'll let him plug it at the end after he goes through something new here called rapid fire questions. But But the fact is that having that expertise behind you, understanding your EBITDA, your marketing, your dentistry right now and in the future. And what I mean by that, and we're going to get into a new dentist, but want you to know that the landlords, for the most part, almost all, pay Carr Realty the fee. We do not pay them. We just reap the benefits of making the real excellent decision of using a company that could really educate us. I want to tell you something out there. I come across a lot of practices to purchase. And one of the biggest issues I'm having in certain cities, especially a city like New York, is, and I do it in other cities, but here is that people have bought years ago, 30 years, 25 years, 40 years, they bought the co-op. And, Guardian was involved in a practice that was fantastic. And we were trying to buy it. The doctor would have made millions and millions of dollars. But the co-op board would not let any non-operating owner buy the space. So the deal was killed. The doctor was definitely horrified that he walked away and he realized that he can't sell it. Are you finding that more than older docs or docs that should have known maybe this was a 50% or 90% co-op and they're very strict, should have read the fine print? Are you finding that a lot?
I would say that it definitely happens. It happens in very specific markets like New York. You're not going to find that in Tulsa or Cleveland or Detroit. Those structures are very, very specific to New York. So yeah, in an ideal scenario, you would have had a good real estate attorney who would have said, here's the pros and cons. Anytime you've got regulation, there's going to be a benefit and there's going to be a possible downside to it. And a lot of times people look at the benefit of what it's going to do for me immediately, but there oftentimes is a very challenging hurdle to overcome in the future. So my advice to people is this: is get a good real estate attorney, get an attorney who understands, again, not a family law attorney, not a car injury attorney, like get a real estate attorney who's tried and true, who knows that market. Have them comb through that document to make sure that there's nothing in there, because you will find this. You'll find boards of people or boards of organizations or co-ops or anything, whether this is city councils or building departments, and they'll tell you you can't do something, and they know what they're saying is not legal. But just like a landlord will tell you something, they're waiting to see if you know better. And so we see this all the time. We'll have people doing new construction projects, and they'll go before a building department. They'll say, "Hey, you can't build that here." And we'll say it's a right by use. It's zone commercial, and this is a right by use. And then you get a real estate attorney involved, sends a letter, and they change their position. You say, well, why would they be trying to block you? They have their own objective. They have their own agenda. So I would say this: don't just take what a board of directors or the board of a co-op tells you you can or can't do. With the president of a co-op, they might have an alternative reason or ulterior motive for saying that. Get a good real estate attorney, go through it, and then see if you can find a way to get around it. And if you can't, then unfortunately, it's like doing a bad lease. Like you have to live and learn from that.
So I got a couple of questions. We established that if I'm a young dentist and I'm starting out, I see the corporate world ahead of me, so I know there's an end game, but I want to be an owner. And I go and I'm trying to figure out, I want to build a practice. I've got a following. First of all, you must be dealing with de novos, startups versus acquisitions. Do you see in your experience, if I'm a young 38-year-old dentist, 32-year-old dentist, I got the entrepreneurial spirit, I want to go, right? Am I going, in your opinion, if it was your brother, would you advise them to go to look at a standing acquisition rather than a de novo? Is that something you don't really deal with, or?
No, I deal with it all the time. Right. We deal with, I mean, right now, as we speak, just to clarify, we're licensed in all 50 states and we have over 5,000 clients that we're actively doing deals for. So we see it all. And we see people come to us and say, hey, I'm definitely going to purchase a practice, but I still need help with the lease or the purchase of the contract for the real estate. Others say, I'm definitely going to start up. And then we have the guys that are in between. Here's what I'll tell you. We do a couple, we're working on probably over 2,000 startups across the country right now for not only dentists, but everything. And I'm telling you, it is very common in dental school or in residency to have the people that are teaching those classes tell you, you have to purchase, you can't start up. And they have a very strong opinion. And then you get practice brokers that come in that don't do startups. And all they say is, you got to buy a practice. You'd be crazy to start up. And I can give you, I've done personally hundreds of dental startups myself, and I can give you story after story after story where we got them a phenomenal location, phenomenal terms. We got them huge build out allowances, free rent packages. They get really good financing to where maybe it starts off as a lower payment and it builds over time. So they have a higher cash flow, big free rent packages that help their cash flow and start up. And if you can build it exactly the way you want it in the location with your brand, you hire the staff, you don't have to undo bad habits. It might take you a little bit longer to get where you want to get initially, but I see a lot of people just blowing past people that bought practices because they have the momentum and they're building on a stronger foundation. So I would say this: there's not a one size fits all. It's like leasing or purchasing real estate. Depends on your options. If you find a phenomenal practice to purchase and you know that this is your track for the future, awesome. But I would tell people, don't listen to the person who's no longer practicing or the guy who gets paid to sell you a practice. If those are the only two voices you're hearing, you probably are going to get a bias. And again, everyone has an opinion. Some people are more objective and are more fair about giving the pros and cons of both. But a lot of these people are out there saying, you have to do this, you can't own, you have to lease, you have to be retail, you have to buy, and it's like, you have to build it up. And those are just people's personal preferences. And again, I'm not exaggerating. I could personally run through my phone and give you hundreds of people that are absolutely killing it today, 3, 4, 5 years into a startup, or 10 or 15 years in, and they would tell you the exact
I
opposite.
think you made a great point by, cleaning up somebody's mess. Many times I've acquired a practice and I spent the first year, I'm in the midst of it now, just cleaning up stuff. And, a lot of times you're right. When you get influenced early on, and that's why we're bringing this to Dentistry Beyond the Numbers, just to educate docs and educate people of what their choice is. Listen, coming from a city like New York, I tell you not to buy. But if you're in, like you said, Tulsa or Florida, or you got a strip mall and you own the condo in that strip mall, my experience on the other side was I owned a couple of properties, and when I got bought out by a DSO or a DPO, they like email you the checks every beginning of the month. So it ends up being a great situation if you don't have those laws that you discussed that are so minor and really targeted in the New York area. Yeah, I think you touched on something else. So now we're into the startup, and we're into the doctor getting his his desire to open, or her desire to open. My question is, what are the what are the things that you look for advising, the important things that we're going into a lease? Is it length? Is it money? Is it concessions? How do you determine where you go with this? And is every area different?
Yeah. So we start by just some of the fundamental questions are, does the doctor know where they want to practice? There's times when there's a clear cut winner, like, hey, I want to live in this community. I grew up here, or there's some tie there. I've done my own research. I want to be here. Other times I hire a demographic company or consultant, or, our company also has very, very robust demographics as well. And so the first thing is, what's the area we're looking at? We try to narrow that down. We don't want to go look over, 5 submarkets. I mean, we want to pin this thing down off the numbers competition. And then once we figure out the area they want to be, like, the game plan again is to figure out what's their budget. They might want again, if you're in New York, you're looking at maybe 1,200 square feet. We have people that'll be in more rural areas say, I want 5,000 square feet. We'll say that's not feasible for your budget. So what does the budget dictate based upon the market we're looking in? And we can run that math equation quickly. And then again, it's are there any options to purchase? If there are, we're going to show them to you. Even if you don't think you want to purchase, we're going to do a purchase versus lease analysis so that you don't have to wonder after you signed a lease if you were ignorant of, you should have looked at different options, or you should have considered it. We try to eliminate any of the I wish I would have known or done concepts. And the way that you do that is you just show them, here's your top 5 or 6. You go 4, 5, 6 rounds of negotiations. And then what we do on that is we're going for everything you just said, Mark. We want the most competitive lease rate, but it's got to be balanced against the right tenant improvement allowance. We want money from landlords. We want our free build out period. Nobody should be paying rent while you're building out your space unless you messed up the build out and missed your window. But besides a contractor error, which is avoidable, no one should be paying for a space while they're building out. You should hopefully get free rent once you open those doors. And that gives you a couple months of time to work the kinks out, to figure out how to get into that cash flow and that rhythm. And then we want other things too. Like, we want to have the right assignability clause. So if you sell your practice, you're not going to get held at gunpoint by the landlord. We want to make sure that you have the right renewal option. Could there be an option to purchase depending on the property? Some yes, some no, but if it's there, we want to look at it. Do you need an exclusive? Like, if you are a specialist, you do not want your top competitor dropping into the same center or building and out positioning you with a nicer space. You don't want that person dropping in right on top of you potentially. So there's a lot of things that are economic related, that are more obvious, like the lease rates, the TI allowance, free rent. Still have to have expertise beyond just knowing what they are. But then there's a lot of other things that are more of the business deal points. And this is where a lot of people, like that co-op clause, a lot of people don't pay attention to the business terms. They're looking just at the numbers, and they lose the forest for the trees. And that's where you gotta have a balanced approach of business and economic. And sometimes it's a lever or a pulley. Like, if you pull one too hard, you're not going to get the business terms you need. You need to go in there. You want the best terms, but you got to understand how to structure a deal.
Exactly. And I just want to remind everyone, I mean, that was like an education there for the last 3 minutes. in real estate on the the lease or the buy side for dental practices, and that's what you give to the doctor that's looking for guidance, right? You give them demographic reports, you give them competition reports, you negotiate the leases, and then you get us a great lease with TIs, with concessions for build outs and a little bit of breathing room when you start bettering the property, because there's an old saying, once it's a dental practice for life. And we're bringing this to a landlord. Maybe we're bringing an existing practice, or we're starting to build our career there. What other things do you offer, or do you guide young doctors in? And maybe doctors that are looking for the second move. Some doctors built out, it's 3, 4 chairs, they're booming. What do they do? I mean, how do they get out? Is there an out? And my word has always been at our table was good guy clauses. Do you find that around the country, or is that limited to one of the hardcore cities that some of
That's
the
another New York specialty right there. So,
well, that specialty I like.
yeah, one of the things that we look at the idea of, is there the ability to expand? We just had this transaction. I still do a couple deals per year just to stay sharp, and I pick and choose the few friendly clients that I've known for a long time. But we had a doctor, we helped him 10 years ago, and just the practice is exploding. The space next door was occupied, but it was occupied by a marketing firm. So we went to the landlord and we just said, look, we're either going to have to relocate this 3,000-foot dental office and you're going to lose that tenant, or if you could either relocate or not renew the marketing tenant next door, we'll sign up for another 10 years. We'll give you another, take down another 1,000 square feet. And so you can lock in the blue chip Class A dental practice that you've had in your building for decades, and they're not going to miss a beat. And that's the person you want. And so the landlord approached the marketing firm, found out how to move them to a different floor. They were happy. They got a new space, a new build out. They didn't really care. And the dentist got exactly what he wanted. So if we can expand a tenant, we always look at that. If we cannot, then we try to time it with when the lease expires, ideally, because most landlords do not lift a finger to help a tenant if they have term left. They're looking at that deal as being mailbox money, and they'll say, look, if you want to lease it or you want to sublease it, that's on you. But I signed a lease with you 10 years ago. You got 4 years left, and I'm expecting a check to hit my mailbox every month. So I don't really have a motivation to help. And then every once in a while, you do find the good guy clause, but the good guys, they'll say, yeah, I'll help you, or we'll start marketing it, and then they'll charge you a fee to do that. But I think the key is, when you're signing these leases, you've got to find the space that's going to accommodate you, not just like for the first 6 months you're open, because you're going to be swimming the first couple months most likely, but you got to find a space that's going to be there for you in years 5, 7, and 10, ideally. And again, there's a balance there. You don't want to stay sitting vacant for 7 years till you grow into it,
Right.
but you also don't want to outgrow a space, 4 years into a 10-year lease. So it's a delicate balance.
It is. I've experienced, and I talk about these egos or these long leases, big spaces. I know somebody that family built out a beautiful space for this doctor, and she's an excellent clinician. Magnificent space, gorgeous, gorgeous pointings, gorgeous details, but the practice didn't go anywhere. And that lease killed her for many years. And then she found a buyer. But we couldn't touch her from an acquisition standpoint because the lease took care of all her EBITDA. I mean, you're dealing with a $26,000 a month lease and try to grow into that. So I think everyone should understand this is what we need to create great EBITDA, but more important than the EBITDA, it's really finding a home for a very long time for your most important asset. And I can tell you personally, I mean, we're going through some in the New Rochelle area that's interesting with a landlord. We had a clause for 1 year. If they sell the building, we have to find a new space. After 7, 8 years, built up a $3, $4 million practice, and now we got to look for another space. So it is hell, and it happens. To Colin, it's called cha-ching. To us, it's called, it's called a pain in my ass. But, I love it, because there are people like yourself and the people that work in your company that have been really helpful for us, getting us a bunch of locations that we could start thinking differently. Like what you're saying, maybe the time is to take that big shot, develop a surgery center, implant center, and think that way. Now, for those of you that don't know and never heard, and I want to circle back, a good guy clause is when we hit the shitter, when we really can't pay our rent, or we need to leave for various reasons. A good guy clause, where I come from, it's something I was preached to, is so a way to get out. A few months, you pay the lease, you broom sweep it, you walk out of the lease, and they re-rent it. You lose a couple of months in your security, but you're not hogtied to it. Is there anything like that in other markets? And go ahead. I'll let you.
Yeah, some of the states have just common laws that talk about landlord mitigation and the idea that landlords have to put a good foot forward or an attempt to mitigate. Like, so if a tenant truly just fails and goes out, a lot of times that's going to result in them just filing for bankruptcy. So there might not be a whole lot there. But if the doctor had to relocate it and has the ability to pay 2 payments but doesn't want to, most states have some type of a common law where the landlords have to do their best to mitigate it, or they should work with the doctor or the tenant to try to get it released.
Right.
Again, if the landlord will do that, that's the right thing to do. They have typically listing agents that will help them, but you can also hire a listing agent yourself, and they can go to market for you. So, that actual concept as far as the good guy clause is predominantly a New York clause. You might see it in like one or two other major cities, but for the most part, you're going to plead with the landlord of like, just take care of me the way you want to be taken care of. I've been a good tenant. I'm not doing this because I have no choice for either the practice's growth or I can't pay the rent anymore. I'm going under. And so most landlords will step up. And also most landlords are aware that if you do stop paying them and they have to go find a new tenant, they want to get that person figured out and found much sooner. So they don't want to risk the idea of you paying them rent, all of a sudden you stop and they have to go find a tenant anyway. So a lot of times they're going to be smart enough to try to mitigate their losses, but everyone's different and everyone's relationship's a little bit different with their landlord.
So we're going to do something today a little different. I want to make sure I don't keep this man longer than I promised, and I am already, because there's a lot to discuss in this. And I must tell everybody, I mean, I've been doing this a long time with many different leases, and it's really amazing because when I started out a number of years ago buying out my first offices, I did not have that. There was no company that was going to be able to guide us through these transactions. I used my brother, who's older than me, is a real estate attorney, and my father, he should rest in peace, was a real estate broker or owned a REIT. So I understood a little bit. But, as we get into these nuances, I really strongly make the recommendation, as savvy as some of my colleagues think they are, and I know we all think we're very savvy. Believe me, having a once replaced or removed and having your team negotiate for us, makes for very good bedfellows. We don't want to start our relationship with a lease or a landlord, especially if it's not corporate. And I wanted to ask you during this next stanza if, I'm always afraid of dealing with corporate, but lately I've been learning that you get more, you can achieve more from a bigger landlord. But I do want to say that everything we do should be checked out professionally. There are clauses in these leases that really we need to make sure we understand. And no matter how savvy we are, this is your business. We fix teeth. We teach teeth. We mentor teeth. We don't talk real estate. And I don't portray or at all think of myself as a real genius. If my family has a discussion about something, I do not voice my if it's not teeth or something that I have knowledge in. This is a very intricate, very important part of and piece. It's one of the legs: staff, lease, supplies. It is one of the legs of building our practice. So I urge everyone to call a Carr Realty in their neighborhood if they're looking for anything, because I've had tremendous success. What we want to start here, Colin, is I want to rapid fire some things at you, and maybe things we discussed, but within 20, 25 seconds, maybe even less, give me the answer to it. If you were starting out right now, you've been doing this a long time already, no matter how you look. Lease or buy right now, today's world.
Purchase if it's available.
Purchase if it's available. And through my years, I honestly think if I had the choice to do it all over again, I would avoid these strict co-ops, but buying is really an advantage, having these annuities, because that's what we're building, right? We're building annuity money that once we retire, if I had 4 or 5 properties that I own, that's just rent coming in every month that I don't have to worry about. So,
Let me give you what you got right there. And let me say 2 things quickly. Number one, typically when someone's selling their practice and they own the real estate, it's, we use the percentage 75% of the time. It's higher than that, but over three-fourths of the time, the real estate's worth more than the practice. And I don't want to, it's hard for me to use like a 90% number because it seems inflated, but I'm telling you, I almost never see real estate that's worth less than the practice, unless it's just a pig of a property or just functionally obsolete property. With the exception of those, that real estate's worth more than the practice 90% of the time. And then the other thing I'll tell you is this, though: you don't not transact if you can't own. We find people that are obsessed with owning, and it's like, listen, if it's not available in the market you want to be in, you don't stop. You don't stop the process of being an owner of a practice. So real estate is still secondary to your income source in your business. Your business is dentistry. Real estate is ancillary. It is a beautiful annuity or asset, but it's not the driving factor.
But I always thought, Colin, if I'm going to have to buy $1 million practice and there's $1.6 million property, I'd much rather not spend 2.6 million and buy something. If I'm going to buy that high, I'd rather find a $1.5 million practice that throws off more revenue, less for decline, and, start generating my money, because I'm not making money from owning it right now. I'm just saving some tax dollars. But if I don't have any revenue, I'm not saving tax dollars. So
Well, that's what I was gonna say is you gotta realize that you don't cash out your dental practice puts a paycheck in your pocket every month. The real estate will put a paycheck, a big one in your pocket in 15 or 20 years. So you gotta realize it is a balancing act. If it's there, look at it. If it's not there, don't
awesome.
stop the process.
Awesome. Let's say we're leasing. I'm a young doc. I've been in the business. I'm a good risk. What are some of the simple pitfalls you would recommend, not to steal your sauce, just asking, what do you think doctors who don't use your service, or doctors who are making some of the mistakes that you've seen in the past?
Well, the top mistake is going it alone. You're never going to see Chipotle or Starbucks or Charles Schwab or Chase Bank, or pick any Fortune 500 company. There's not one that's going to have some random person who doesn't know what they're doing leading the way. So if you want to emulate the top companies in the world, you hire professionals. Period. The second thing I see people do is they don't know how to negotiate. All they do is they wait for the offer to come in from the landlord, and whatever lease rate gets submitted, they ask for less. And whatever TI allowance comes in, they ask for more. And it's not a factual negotiation. That's what's called bartering or bluffing. And so in order to have a factual negotiation, you have to know the market, and you have to have a reason behind what you're asking for. And you could only have that if you know the market. If we talk any topic and you're uneducated, you're just literally guessing. You're trying to figure out what I can get them to do. A landlord knows if you're just asking to ask, or if you're asking because you have two other properties on the hook, and those other two landlords have given you a bona fide offer with specific terms, and you can talk very intelligently and very articulately about those offers. If you don't have other properties to use as your posture, you're just bluffing. And so second mistake is people pick one property, or they have no market knowledge and they negotiate. The landlords know that you have no idea. And the third one I give you about
It's an unbelievable concept.
yeah. But the third I give you is people, doctors are social. And so they'll talk to their colleagues and peers, and they'll say, hey, you're in my area. What did you get? And the doctor will tell them like how much they're paying or what they did or didn't get in a lease. And then they will think that's a good benchmark. And so it's like you're asking somebody who's overpaying and left a couple $100,000 on the table what type of deal they had, and then you benchmark your deal off that. It's a really bad way to go. Like, you don't want to compare yourself to the doctor that did not capitalize and left hundreds of thousands on the table. You want to compare your current terms to what's available, and that's predicated upon your other options, not what some other person paid 4 years ago when they signed a lease.
So valuable. I mean, we don't want to ask advice from a guy who didn't get advice. So, I mean, that would be a suicide. But I got to tell you, that's amazingly amazing advice. I mean, really is. Because if you think about it, you're really changing the landscape for us dentists. Like I said, we think we're smart. We just know what we know. And I've tried it myself. And I just think we're dealing in a different league. Whatever market you're in, this is what you guys do. And it's an amazing thing to have. And I said amazing a lot because I do think it is. I mean, I really do think that this is standing out there for all my colleagues to take advantage of. And, it's a simple concept. Just hire somebody that's being paid by somebody else and get educated. But educated to know that you're going in the right direction for the right cause and the right way. And that is establishing a business, generating revenue. And there might be a buyout, a buy later on, maybe rent with an option to buy. But there's so many things in the real estate world. And it is the first step to building our practice, is generating something. And Colin made a point before we finish up. This is with you forever. I mean, for the foreseeable future, at least. Meaning you hire somebody, they don't work out, could be an expensive salary, you terminate them. You cannot terminate the lease. So when we use an employment agency, we use interviews, use the professionals. I really do think that. I think there's been so many points mentioned from how to negotiate that multi-location negotiation, something that I would not know how to begin, nor would I end up in a positive force. So I think that is brilliant, and that's just leverage to use against landlords. Remember, docs, we are desirable, but they would rather have us than maybe some of these behemoths like a Barnes and Noble. I mean, because they're going in and out. We're steady as they go. So when you get a spot, you could just dig down and grow. I got to tell you, today we learned so much from you, Colin, and I learn a lot from you guys on a weekly basis. I do want to plug Colin's website, and it is carr.us. Is that correct?
That's right.
And I must tell you, the few people that I've dealt with at Carr have been extremely, like I said before, extremely professional, very knowledgeable. And I really think that if you're having a question, Colin, maybe you could share something else. Maybe how do they get to you other than going through the website? That might be, I want my listeners to be able to use somebody that right now they can afford to, they need some advice. So
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that, Mark. I mean, let me stamp this and say, look,
please.
there is no savvy business owner who's doing their own taxes. Like, the tax laws change every year. Even if you can fill out a form online or you could do some online tax, there is no savvy doctor doing their own taxes. There is no doctor who should be reviewing their own legal documents. There's no doctor who should be, I mean, you should have insurance. Like, those are just obvious things. You're not your own architect. You're not your own contractor. Every one of those categories, you say, well, of course I'm going to use a professional. But for whatever reason, because people can call on a property or say, send me an offer, or they can counter via an email and then eventually sign a lease, they just think, well, I could do it myself. Just because you could do something yourself does not mean that it's a good decision. So, yeah, I just think that it's a key for everything. It's not just
So important. It's so important. But in closing, I do want to make everyone aware that somebody I know with the mind of some of my colleagues sitting somewhere, I never met them, and they're saying, yeah, I know, but the landlord will bake it into my lease and it's not the case. I will tell you from a firsthand experience, the landlord wants Carr because it goes smoother, goes quicker. They know what to ask for. They know how to expedite it, and it's done. We will go back 4 or 5 times. We'll ask this, we'll ask that, and we don't know what to ask. Colin's being kind by saying you don't pick a real estate guide or a broker that's working for you. You're going to leave hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table. And to me, those days are over. We got better things to do. We have patients to see, practices to grow. Let the professionals do all leases. And I can tell you from firsthand, it works. And it doesn't come out of your pocket. And that's why Colin is on today, because it works. He's got great professionals. Colin Carr, thank you so much. You're a rising star in the real estate world, and I really believe you're a rising star in the dental world. So I look forward to seeing you around. You're awesome. There's a wealth of knowledge, and I urge all my listeners to reach out and get straight property-wise. Really get straight so you can really dig in and just build a behemoth of a business and just enjoy it. And know in the end, if you do buy it, you've got a great nest egg falling back on. So I wish you all the best. Thank you so much, Colin. Thank you. Dentistry Beyond the Numbers thanks you. And we wish you all the best, and hopefully you'll come back. Woo! What an action-packed episode. He threw so many ideas and ways of negotiating leases, asking for what you need as far as construction and renovation costs. And keep in mind the old saying in real estate, once a property is a dental property, it's a dental property for life. So we have that leverage. But I got to tell you, Colin is just on the precipice. He's on the cutting edge of real estate and professional real estate around the country. Don't forget that good guy clause. That saved me a lot. We talked about it. He says it's not in a lot of markets. Some of the big markets have it, but this is what makes a general dentist a super general dentist. They understand the finances, the leases, the expenses, and they understand how to get into turbulent times and get out of it. Makes a real businessman. That's what we're developing here on Dentistry Beyond the Numbers. Thank you so much, Colin Carr. Great episode.